when you need to see it to believe it. Radiolive.co.nz.
A little while ago, listeners, I caught up with Ian Singleton, a primatologist who was visiting Auckland Zoo. His special interest, of course, is working with the endangered orangutan, our cousins, really, the Indonesian, the South Asian forest. And news has come to light, bad news, regarding the protection of their environment, which, of course, is so essential to their survival. Ian Singleton is working in Aceh, that's part of Indonesia, and to tell us about this law being passed by the Aceh government, the Aceh Parliament, independent, I understand, from the rest of Indonesia, and what it means to the survival, the ongoing survival of the orangutan. Ian, first of all, can you just tell us where you are and whereabouts you're working so the listeners can have some idea of where you're at?
Okay, I'm right now at home, which is in the city of Medan in the province of North Sumatra, which is not the northernmost part of the island. The northernmost province in Sumatra is Aceh. And pretty much all of the remaining wild Sumatran orangutans up here are in Aceh province, with about 15% also in North Sumatra. So our office and my house is based in Medan, but a lot of our work is trying to protect the forest and protect the orangutans within the province of Aceh in the far north.
It's quite famously well known that their environment has been imperiled because of ongoing development, but you're really wanting to give us an eyes up to something which has happened regarding the Aceh Parliament passing a controversial law which is going to, in your opinion, see their environment even further degraded and their survival chances going down, becoming more imperiled. What's happening?
Well, basically, Aceh still has a lot of really beautiful, pristine tropical rainforest. The problem is that most of it is very steep, high, mountainous terrain, and there's very few orangutans and elephants and tigers up that high as well. But and the reason it still has this forest because the people traditionally realize that once you clear these forests on such steep and rugged terrain, you have consequences. You have flash floods and which kill people, which wipe out whole villages, and also destroy agriculture and everything else. So it's quite dangerous to mess with these forests. So for many decades, they've had a kind of de facto protection. And then in the 90s, this was kind of strengthened with the development of a thing called the LOSA ecosystem, which sort of enshrined in law the protection of one of the biggest chunks of forest, 2.6 million hectares, which contains most of the orangutans, as a sort of a legally protected area. But what the Aceh government is trying to do now is they're trying to just kind of ignore all that progress and open up these forests for new timber mining and plantation concessions, which not only will be disastrous for the biodiversity that lives there, but also potentially has huge consequences for the human populations living there and downstream of these areas.
Has the Aceh Parliament just disregarded this? Did they sign up to it in the first place, the LOSA ecosystem legal protection?
Yes, that was it was the very first step in that process was agreements with all of the local district governments who represent the communities around the edge, and they wanted it. And the reason it was in the LOSA as well was kind of already protected ever since the Dutch colonial times, because the local communities there valued the services they got from these forests. But until very recently, I mean, decisions in Aceh have been based on sort of sound understanding of the realities and also on good technical information. And the forestry in Aceh was also very stable during an armed civil conflict, which ran for several decades, but it was really intense between the sort of late 90s and the mid-2000s when we had the tsunami. But the current government, which was elected in about 2 years ago, it seems to be just ignoring all of these things and just trying to open up the forests and sell them off to the highest bidder. And, it's potentially disastrous, and we're doing our very best to try and prevent it, but we're having a hard time with it.
They passed this law. It's all go. I mean, what can be done? What organisations acting either locally or internationally have a dog in this fight? What could be done?
Well, there are processes that have to be gone through. I mean, there was actually a previous spatial plan for the province that was based on good data and put forward by the previous governor. And that was kind of approved by the central government in Jakarta, in principle. Now, what the new government did when it was elected was kind of sort of say, oh, well, our spatial plan is already approved in principle. So they decided they would completely change it and try and fast-track a new version through. Now, fortunately, we and many other people within Aceh found out about that, and we blew it up in the media, and we slowed that process down. But there is immense pressure now for the Aceh government to finalise their spatial plan because it's long overdue. And just on the 27th of December now, the Aceh Parliament sort of approved and ratified by provincial law the new plan and submitted it to the central government again on the 30th. And the Minister of Internal Affairs now has about 15 days to decide whether it's acceptable or not, and either accept it or request changes. So right now, the only way to do anything about this is to lobby the Indonesian central government in Jakarta, the president himself and the Minister of Internal Affairs. This is the last chance we have.
What is this? You're saying this thing, spatial plan. What is the spatial plan?
I mean, I'm no expert on these things, but
what does it mean?
It's basically, you know, most governments in around the world, they have an area of which they control, and they're obliged to sort of map it out and plan which areas are for which uses and which areas are off limits and which areas are available for industrial and agricultural uses, and that's what it is. It's basically, it maps out the whole province and says, well, you can't go here for plantations, but you can go there, and you can do this there, and you can do that there. So it's essentially the sort of master plan for the land use management of the entire province.
Okay. How independent is the Aceh Parliament from the central government?
That's a very good question. As a result of this long-running conflict, which culminated in the Helsinki Peace Agreement in 2005, just after the tsunami, the Aceh government has its own special Aceh governance law, which does give it a lot more powers and control over its own natural resources than most provinces within Indonesia. But it's still a part of Indonesia, and it's still obliged to follow national laws. And what we sort of consider, and after legal advice, we see that the new spatial plan doesn't do that. It actually contravenes Aceh's own special autonomy governance law, because there is a clause in there that obliges the Aceh government itself to manage and protect the Losa ecosystem. But despite that, it doesn't even mention the words Losa ecosystem in the entire spatial plan.
Well, it seems that the Parliament are very keen to get economic progress going in that area, despite the threats to the unique environment, the Losa ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Is this partially... Well, we know there's a fair amount of deprivation, especially compared to Western standards in the Aceh region. Is it still suffering from the latent effects of the tsunami and the civil war together, and it's like desperate to try and play some sort of catch-up?
It's not the impression I get. I think Aceh has made an amazing recovery after the tsunami and the civil war, and it's, you know, the road network and everything else in Aceh is way, way better and way more well-maintained than it is in North Sumatra province. The issue here is coming back to the beginning, and the reason why these forests are still here today is because they are dangerous to exploit. These forests are very, very steep, and as soon as you denude the watersheds and everything, flash floods are very common. We already lose, I say we, but hundreds and hundreds of Achenese people die every year already due to flash floods, even in places where there has been no clearance of the forests. And so development, there are two ways to develop. One is to develop for the maximum benefits in the short term and line your pockets as quickly as you can. And the other one is to have a strategy for long-term sustainable economic development that benefits everybody. And this is what we're pushing for. The current spatial plan basically just opens up the whole area for business, and is only going to benefit a few very rich people who probably don't even live in Aceh anyway. And it's not going to be in the long-term interest of sustained economic development of the province. Whereas managing your water resources and your other environmental services and your own ecosystem is the way forward for sustained economic long-term development.
Is the argument regarding this divided again along lines inherited from the civil strife that Aceh had for those years?
I don't think the argument for the spatial plan as it is not based on that. That's based on quick economic gain and maximising benefits to a privileged few. But the fact that they are trying to get away with it and they're managing to do so well is based on that, because I always have this picture in my head of two sort of bull elephant seals on the beach, sort of jostling to see who's the bigger and everything else. And even with the Aceh governance law, which gives it its own special rights, it's a law that remains to be tested, and it's a question of who's prepared to push the other one furthest and who's going to back down first. So this is very much the unknown quantity. So,
in just saying that, how you say it's actually dangerous to develop these areas because of the dangers to human habitation downstream, literally.
Yeah.
So it's really regardless of the ecological impact. It's simply a bad civil engineering idea.
Yes, it's based. I mean, there's been many very detailed technical reviews of Aceh and its environment, and it's a very extremely environmentally sensitive region. And these reviews have been done. The details have been published. The mapping and the GIS work, the planning work in Aceh is second to none in Indonesia, probably as a result of the conflict and the tsunami. And yet, all this technical information and advice is just being completely ignored. One of the critical issues for us with the biodiversity is also a number of roads that have been cut through these high mountainous areas. And these are roads that are only being built because whilst they're being built, somebody gets an opportunity to pocket some money. They don't really go to any major population centres. They're going through terrain which is extremely steep and dangerous. And even if they were constructed, they would be falling apart within 12 months and be maintained. It's just absolutely ridiculous to go ahead with these kind of things. Makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay, we hear a lot, and there's a fair amount of consciousness, I think, in the Western world anyway, about palm oil plantations overtaking what would otherwise be rainforest and ecologically important ideas. This is outside of that realm. That's really for the lowlands, isn't it?
Yes, but I mean there are still some decent chunks of lowland forest, probably the last really significant tracts of lowland forest in the whole of Sumatra, and they are now threatened with new palm oil concessions as well, including significant areas within the Losar ecosystem itself, which are home to not just the orangutans, but also the last real viable populations of Sumatran elephants and Sumatran tigers as well.
Is the Aceh Parliament, have they put forward any mitigation for the ecosystem, setting aside that it may create worse floods and just be a bad idea, but regarding the ecological impact, are they putting in any mitigating measures of, I don't know, even a transferal of animals, anything at all, or are they just not mentioning it?
I think they're not really mentioning the biodiversity. Their stock argument for that one is, everybody cares more about animals than people, which is certainly not the case. But as for mitigating circumstances, we and many other people we've been quite active in blowing up these problems in the media, both nationally and internationally, and to the point where they've responded by publishing a few press articles about how they've trained new units to combat natural disasters in many of the district government areas. And to me, that's kind of a very much just a political statement. But it is interesting because it acknowledges the fact that what we're saying is absolutely true. They realise that there will be a massive increase in major catastrophic environmental disasters, and there will also be massive losses to local economies. A classic example is the area of Pidi in the very far north. I mean, this is the rice bowl production area of Aceh, and yet its watersheds are already almost completely denuded, and under the new spatial plan they will be completely bored within about 2 or 3 years. They run in the risk of destroying their own agricultural production.
What percentage of I'll use the orangutan, I know all the entire ecosystems are interconnected and very, very important, but I'll use them as the postcard, really. What percentage of that area would be under threat? What would be left? Is any sacrosanct?
There are various numbers going around, but right now, off the top of my head, because I don't have anything in front of me, I would say that there's probably around 4 million hectares of reasonably good forest left in Aceh, and we'll lose over half of that, I think. Actually, no, that's probably an exaggeration. But we stand to lose sort of as much as a million hectares of rainforest in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. And there are still areas that will be off limits, parts of the Losa ecosystem, but very small parts, and many of the areas that will still be off limits to concessions, unfortunately, have roads going across them. So
right.
Even if there are wildlife populations in there, they will be fragmented into non-viable populations. And what we'll be left with in 15 years will be just one tiny little, relatively tiny blob on the west coast there, which is what we call now the West Losa area, and we stand to lose everything else. Absolutely everything else.
Have you got any idea of the orangutan population in these areas?
Yeah, the best estimates published so far for Sumatran orangutans is around the 6,000 to 7,000 mark, and I'd predict that within sort of 15 years, 20 years, we may well be down to about 1,000 or even less.
It's been tabled by a few people that aren't completely mad that our primate cousins should really be accorded some types of rights above some other animals, mainly because they're close to us. That seems kind of arrogant from my point of view, but also for a reasonable argument, their level of self-awareness.
Yeah. I mean, I work with a lot of orangutans now. Through our centres, we've dealt with over 20 odd years. I've dealt with sort of about 300 orangutans, and they're all completely different, and they're extremely sentient. And people say, sometimes, why are you spending this money on protecting these individuals when you should be fighting for the bigger population? Well, we're trying to do both because it's impossible to turn down and refuse to help an individual orangutan when it's in need, because it's just so much like ignoring a human in need.
Okay, I bet the Aceh authorities aren't exactly stoked with people like yourself trying to raise awareness of this, and they're famously kind of intolerant of dissent compared with a lot of governments we're familiar with. Are you anxious at all about that?
So far, no problem. I think one of our strengths is that we've never really pushed anything that we didn't think was true, and we couldn't back up with solid evidence or good technical information. And I think that's what's proving a bit of a thorn in their side, because we are difficult to argue against. But I've also got some very good news for you. We've been fighting a battle against some palm oil companies in the Tripla swamps for the last couple of years, mostly for illegally clearing and burning and draining deep peatland over there, which again is important orangutan habitat and also within the local ecosystem. Now, there are now several legal cases against 5 companies operating there. We've already won one of these cases about a year ago through a local NGO called Wildheat, who managed to get one of the concessions cancelled. And then just last night, about 11 o'clock, our time, we heard that another case has been won, and this time by the Ministry of the Environment against the company, and they now have to pay somewhere between, I think, $11 million in compensation, and they're supposed to spend about $23 million in restoring the habitat that they've destroyed. And so this is a major piece of progress. We're very proud of that.
Ian Singleton from Sumatra, working with the orangutan there. Thank you very much. We'll certainly be following this story with interest.
Good. Thank you very much as well. I hope people do keep an eye on what's going on and get involved as they can.
Radio Live. Entertaining talk and news as it happens.